It's the Worth Knowing live stream. I'm Matt Robison, and today the deep tension and rage building under the surface of American politics, not just because we've had tech issues today, and the 5 stories that are going to shape politics for the rest of this year and beyond. Look, it's mid-August. It's the dog days. It's supposed to be where everyone catches a breath before the post-Labor Day sprint. It's the 7th inning stretch. Congress is on recess. Political reporters probably sneaking in one last shot at a few days off. CNN's running ridiculous B-roll. But that's not what's been happening. It's been a seething summer, subterranean fights that break onto the surface before going back underground. And that's what it still feels like this week right now. Take the budding civil war inside the Democratic Party. In the past few months, it's broken into open conflict in state primaries, and then it's slipped back below the surface. With the recent release of a truly wild DSA platform that's driven a moderate backlash, and with even Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez looking to create some distance from what she calls the crazy wokeness of woke 1.0, one of the biggest questions has become, will the Democratic Party tear itself apart, or is it going to find a way through this? And what about the growing schism in the Republican Party with MTG and Tucker Carlson making serious noise about starting a third party? How long will the merger of the Trump coalition and the Republican Party be able to hold? What about the anti-establishment anger, the true anger that's gripped both parties? Will the government be able to function with serious generational issues facing us, like the looming insolvency of Social Security? What about the coming midterm elections? With all indications pointing toward a growing wave for Democrats, Donald Trump seems to have put all of his eggs in the election subversion basket. So will the courts stop him? And what if they can't? Now is clearly the perfect time for a step back on all of these big looming questions. And there's no one better to step back with than my returning guest, Washington Monthly politics editor, Bill Scher. Bill, welcome.
Thank you for having me back.
It's a pleasure to have you back. It's long delayed. And I'll just start right out by saying that Jim Williams thinks the situation with the Dems will get ironed out. And that is right on point. And hello to everyone, by the way, who are in the chats. Really appreciate seeing you again. It's been a couple of weeks, a lot of moving parts going on around here. Cliff stepped in 1 week. Anyway, there's been a lot going on. But Bill, that was sort of the topic of your article this morning, laying the predicate for how progressives and more moderate Democrats could find common ground. It seems like your argument is actually there is a lot of common ground, and it happens to overlap with where most Americans are. So is that a fair characterization of what you're writing up? And what did you find?
The column you're talking about that I published today in the Washington Monthly looked specifically at this CBS News YouGov poll that came out on Sunday. And I've seen some cherry-picked headlines from it, but you really want to look at the whole thing, because I haven't seen a whole lot of polling that tries to really drill deep into the socialist, progressive, moderate divides in the Democratic Party and how that compares with the country at large. And it doesn't cover every single issue. It's not getting into all sorts of policy nuances, so it's still limited. But they did a series of questions. What are you willing to raise taxes for? And you might think the answer would be nothing. I would never raise my taxes for anything. But you saw majorities say, I would raise my taxes for healthcare. I would raise my taxes for education. I would raise my taxes for food assistance. Even a slight majority for raising taxes for housing, but not a majority for police and law enforcement, not a majority for military defense, not a majority for border and immigration law enforcement. And in all these issues, you see the polling had crosstabs for both Democrat, Independent, Republican, and liberal, moderate, conservative. And you see a lot of overlap between Democrat, Independent, a lot of overlap between liberal and moderate. One wrinkle there was I think the moderates were slightly in favor of raising taxes for police, but just barely. Now, then when they ask questions about socialism, I think they're not defining socialism. It's really just the word or the vibe or what have you. Then you see the three-way split work differently, where Democrats are not aligned with the independents and the moderates, and those folks in the middle are tilting towards the Republicans. So, and I should also say there was another question about raising taxes or do the wealthy pay their fair share? are they currently paying less than their fair share? And on that one, Democrats, independents, liberals, moderates are aligned. So all sorts of Democrats and Democratic socialists say tax the rich. That's not controversial. There's lots of common ground there. So the word socialism is still divisive. We may not be in the 80s. It may not be the Cold War. Just the mere fact that Democrats are far more partial to it is probably different than where it was 40 years ago, but that it hasn't carried over into the middle of the country yet. So if you can put that branding to the side, there's a whole lot of area to work with where you wouldn't be having a civil war between left and center, and you'd have a working majority coalition.
I really want to talk about, and I'm just going to put in the parking lot an article you wrote about the seething anger at the establishment. I made that my story number 3, if I recall right. We're going to hold on to that because I think there's a lot in what you're saying that suggests that what the DSA aligned wing of the party, what the progressive wing of the party has done is this odd bit of mental legerdemain where they're sort of saying progressive equals fighter. And that's really not legit. I want to return to that in a second because I think the first thing that we really should hit on is your key point is progressives, and I think you could really call them mainline progressives, are sort of one swim lane in the Democratic Party. Moderate, or you could call them centrist Democrats, are another swim lane. And we've been talking about this as one versus the other. But I think what's emerged, and I feel like I'm getting a flavor of this in your writing at Washington Monthly as well, is that there's actually 3 swim lanes. And what we're beginning to see is a little bit of a split among progressives between progressives and the DSA. And there's a little bit of standoffishness. Abdul El-Sayed doesn't want to fully go all that way. Maybe that's political maneuvering. And then there are the comments from AOC. But it feels to me like that's what I'm picking up. And it feels like the spark for that was the release of the DSA platform, which is something you wrote about several weeks ago at Washington Monthly. And I think people are still really wrapping their heads around what's in there. Talk to me a little bit about your review of that DSA platform and just how radical a document it seems to be.
Let me preface that first.
Sure.
I think it is hard to talk about all these different lanes because I think there's lots of cross currents going on right now. And I think sort of preceding the publication of the DSA platform or people's awareness of the DSA platform, I think there's been a built up animosity towards the Democratic establishment that they don't fight hard enough. They're weak, they're feckless, they're poor, they're not strategic. And you see some evidence of this in polling that shows a generational split. And so Gen Z millennial goes in a bit of a different direction than Gen X and Boomer. And so even though, as I argued in the column you referenced, that Democratic establishment's actually on a pretty good run right now. They have flipped 30 state legislative seats since Trump was inaugurated. And that was a big sore point in the Obama years. Why are we losing all these state legislative seats? We've now flipped 30 of them and seated none. No one's pitched that kind of a shutout in at least 15 years. Trump's approval is below 40%. There are Senate races that no one thought were going to be competitive a year ago in Texas, Alaska, Iowa, Ohio, maybe even Kansas now. That's all a testament to how well the team is working. But because there are certain high profile moments, like Democrats didn't force a government shutdown, for example, certain things that Trump does, Democrats are powerless to stop. And when you say that to folks, I can't stop that one, they get mad at you. You're making excuses. And you understand why people are frustrated that Trump's able to do as much as he does. So that gets filtered down to Democrats don't fight hard enough, which gave an opening for more edgy socialists to not just say, I'm going to fight hard. I'm proving it by the fact that I'm not going to be cowed by what these establishment elder statesman types tell me is electable and not electable. I don't need to throw away the socialist label. I don't need to be moderate when it comes to the Middle East. have to worry about that kind of thing to show that I'm going to go to the mat. And so you had a certain moment in the part of the summer where you saw some dramatic upsets in New York City and in Denver, a few other scattered places that aren't quite, people weren't necessarily socialist, but the populist insurgent was being a more establishment candidate. And then this platform comes out. And I think when it was first published, like no one really looked at the thing. Maybe a few people online were picking it apart, but it wasn't getting that much attention. Then one of the DSA co-chairs goes on Fox News Sunday, where it's guaranteed to get a ton of attention. And she's done this is Margaret, I think her first name is
Megan Romer.
Megan, sorry, I apologize. She's done a handful of interviews lately, and I think she has a purposeful style where she speaks very succinctly, pithily. Yes, no, not going to apologize for this, not going to shy away from that, whether it's abolishing prisons or getting rid of the Senate, putting the presidency of the Supreme Court under Congress. That stuff, she's just not going to be at all hesitant about that, tentative about that. And so you literally could take the Fox interview and just make a 30-second ad of that alone, because she's so pithy in her acknowledgement that this is what's in the DSA platform. And I don't even know anyone running for Congress, even if they're DSA backed, who has said, yeah, I agree with this platform.
I have an exception for you.
Okay.
May I introduce you to Daria Lisa something Chevalier?
Oh, yeah, she embraced it fully.
She has, you know how Donald Trump, creepily a lecherous rapist, you know how he likes to embrace the flag like it's really inappropriate and very cringy? That is what she has done to the DSA platform. She wants to abolish the forces of the carceral state. Listen, I have a degree from Harvard and I needed a thesaurus for that one, man. I did not understand what the fuck she was talking about. And then I looked it up and I'm like, holy smokes. Wait, hold on. Strasbourg, comrade. I enjoy your brilliant politicking there. You know who's applauding? And this is a comment that we had a little ways back here in the chat. Vladimir Putin. Really enjoying this. Really glad Megan Romer is on Fox News Sunday, and Vladimir is like, yes, I'm so thrilled, because this is tearing the Democrats apart. And yet everything you say is true. Your piece is very well written. People can look it up on Washington Monthly. And your headline, I don't know, you're an editor, so you have control of your headlines probably in a way that I don't. When I've submitted to you as the politics editor there. So you've messed around with my headlines, but your headline is the DSA platform would destroy American democracy. You're not pulling any punches there, man. I mean, this is a pretty extreme document.
But I was really talking something very specific there. And I really don't mean that in a red baiting way. I don't mean that to say they're not patriotic and don't want America to do well. Specifically about the proposal to, I'm not putting words in their mouth. They said we should rewrite the Constitution and change the structure of the federal government so it's not three co-equal branches. There is a dominant unicameral Congress, and the presidency, the executive branch, and the judicial branch and Supreme Court are under that Congress. And you could say that just sounds like parliamentary government that I see in Europe. And sure, I'm not saying you're a bad human being if that's what you believe in, but as a literal matter, it's not American democracy. It is not what the American style of democracy has been. And you may hate that kind of democracy. I know lots of people, socialists and otherwise, that are intensely frustrated with how the Supreme Court has throttled the Democratic agenda during Democratic presidencies and has been given a pass to Donald Trump in a lot of areas. And so I realize I am not necessarily in the majority of Democratic Party views on this subject. But I would argue there's a reason why Hungary went full fascist for 15 years. They did not have American-style checks and balances. So you can have a situation where an authoritarian-minded person wins one election and then can take control over all the branches. And as I am not going to argue that the current United States Supreme Court are heroes. I'm not saying you have to post them on your wall, but I will say that because of the structure of our government, that those people on the Supreme Court, even those that Donald Trump appointed himself, can say, no, Don, you can't impose tariffs whenever you feel like it. No, you can't send the military into American cities when they have not been invited by the local and state governments. No, you can't just unilaterally rewrite the Constitution and eliminate birthright citizenship. And you may say to me, you're setting a pretty freaking low bar if that's what you're hanging your hat on. But I would argue that is a line that separates us from still being a democracy and going full fascist. It doesn't mean that Donald Trump has done nothing bad or has not been able to do things bad. But if you didn't have that firewall, if you didn't have the capacity for the judicial branch to say, no, I got to draw a line here, you can end up like Hungary. And we would have ended up like Hungary with this current president. And so what the DSA is trying to do is take advantage of all of this palpable anger, understandable anger that people have, that Donald Trump has been able to find the soft underbelly in a lot of the current structure of government and do lots of authoritarian things, to then say, let's just get rid of the entire operation. And so that way we can do everything the way we want to once we win, once we get a trifecta of some sort. And I just think once you break that seal and that pendulum swings the other way, you are not going to like where that goes.
Two quick things. One, I'm going to be very interested. I wish we'd almost done this in the reverse order. I'm going to be very interested to see your reaction to the piece that I'm putting up on Substack tomorrow, which kind of follows on a very short, counterintuitive zag that I took on my weekly political rehab show last week, in which I said that there is a premise that we have all come to accept about judicial supremacy for the Supreme Court and the roles of the three branches of government. And I think the premise is wrong. There's a strong historical record that it's wrong. There's a lot of legal scholarship to suggest that it's wrong. And I think it's really time for a rethink that would once again elevate the role of the first branch of the legislative branch, the Congress, in deciding what is constitutional and what is not. Now, that said, I think there's a very far cry from that article that's coming out tomorrow, so I hope people will check that out, and what the DSA is putting forward here, which you correctly, in my view, say would have the perverse effect of concentrating power in a completely unacceptable way, and it would make our government far more dysfunctional. What bothers me as much or more is the incredible extremism that Ms. Romer and her ilk have put forward. Most people are unaware of the fact that the DSA has essentially had an internal coup. Many of the original founders have been drummed out or have resigned, have written an open letter decrying the direction that the leadership of the DSA has taken. Romer, in that interview on Fox News and in other interviews around it, including on the New Yorker podcast with David Remnick, has gone on to say that any support for Israel whatsoever is unacceptable. The DSA has withdrawn its endorsement of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez after she voted in favor of a House resolution saying that denying Israel's right to exist constitutes anti-Semitism. That's a proposition that I think polling would find most Americans would actually agree with AOC on that. And she has praised Cuba as a model for government, as she said, gee, they're awfully LGBTQ friendly, and they're sort of a model for participatory democracy. She also said that the events of October 7th in Israel were inevitable, a quintessential case of victim blaming. So after that little rant there, I want to turn to AOC for a second. Mm-hmm. And I want to see what you make of this. And I might clip this later. So consider this. This is my open appeal to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Hey, Congresswoman, it's me, Matt. Good to see you. I like you. More than that, I respect you. I think you are really smart, and I think you're really able. And I've been really impressed by the way you've navigated, especially recent years in your career. However, if I were to take some truth serum right now, I would say that the ball is in your court. It's really cute to laugh off woke 1.0 as crazy, like you did last week. I agree with you on that, by the way. But in a way, it's also kind of not funny. It played a large part in the authoritarian kleptocratic catastrophe that we're living through right now. The reaction to woke 1.0 is part of the horrible reality that we've inherited now. Now, to be fair, Biden's hubris played a role in that as well. But you are the future of the Democratic Socialists of America. They have basically sent you a notice of divorce. I'd like to point out to you, AOC, that they need you more than you need them. You have transcended them. You are beyond them. You are the face of the future of progressivism in this country. So my challenge to you is to create the schism that is long overdue. It is time to kick these communists out of our party, renounce Daria Liza Chevalier, who threw a celebration party for Hamas on October 8th, 2023. True story. And reaffirm the real progressive values that you stand for. If you do that, I hereby predict that you will be number one in polling for who will be the Democratic nominee and who people want to be the Democratic nominee for president in 2028. Break up with the DSA, forge your own progressive path, get these traitors out of our party, and we will welcome you as our new leader in the Democratic Party. Thank you. All right, Bill, I'm back to you. Am I crazy? What do you make of my rant?
When AOC was on ABC's This Week the other day, she was asked about, are you in the DSA? She said, New York City chapter, not national. So she's already done some of the distancing that you're asking for. I don't think she's going to go as far as to renounce who's soon to be your fellow congressional colleague. But Mayor Mamdani distanced himself from the platform. I think Francesca Hong, who came up short in the Wisconsin governor primary, she also distanced herself from the DSA platform. There's a lot. Newsflash, socialists don't always agree. There's a long history of socialists not getting along, not getting on the same page.
The anarchists have the same problem.
Yes. So it is tricky to, so I want to be fair. I don't want to baselessly paint people with a broad brush and say, if you call yourself a socialist, then therefore you own this DSA platform. Plenty of Democrats run for office and say, I don't agree with the Democratic Party platform here or there. Republicans have said that about their platforms when they had real platforms. So that's kind of standard, that individual candidates can carve their own path. But because there is this fuzziness, what is meant by socialism, it's only fair for a reporter or opposing candidate can raise the question, are you tied to this organization? Are you tied to this platform? Are you being straight with me when you say you don't agree with this or that? And I think the CBS poll suggests the socialist branding isn't worth it. It isn't worth going through all that rigmarole to cling on to that label. It may bring a certain cachet in certain blue pockets, but generally speaking, it's not that great an advertising tool. But we are where we are in the party. And so there is going to be a minimum of 5 more DSA-backed Congress people who will join AOC and Rashida Tlaib. There's certain squad members like Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Pressley, who technically speaking are not DSA-backed, but you might have a broader definition of these things. And there are other people you might consider progressive populists who might get into Congress. You're also technically not DSA-backed. And we don't know yet. You never really know how they're going to perform once they get inside. How far are they going to push that envelope? Are they going to try to work constructively just to kind of move the whole caucus in a few ticks to the left? Or are they going to try to do a Freedom Caucus thing and withhold votes, deny Hakeem Jeffries the speakership, or tank a bill? So there was an attempt in the Biden administration to tank the infrastructure compromise. And AOC was somebody who spoke pretty openly about wanting to replicate the Freedom Caucus. Let's use what power we have to stop bipartisan compromises, which we think are, if not insufficient, outright negative, and use that leverage to get better legislation. And I would argue, and I argued at the time, that strategy was holding up legislation that was net positive and hurt the Democratic Party generally for a period of several months. And it wasn't until Terry McAuliffe lost the governor's race in Virginia where the party leaders were like, okay, screw this. We got to pass this freaking bill. And the holdouts were leaned on by the White House and they surrendered and that bill got passed. So It's not a strategy that I am partial to, and I can't predict right now if AOC is going to go back to that a second time.
I doubt it.
But
because she's gone through the painful process of laboring in the minority. And I think that to me, and this sounds condescending, I don't mean it to be. I really don't mean it to be. She's a member of Congress. I mean this respectfully. I think she's matured. I think she's matured in recent years. She's not occupying Nancy Pelosi's office with the Sunrise teenagers anymore. I think going through the last few years, you see it in her rhetoric. You see it in the tone she's tried to set. Zoran Mamdani, by the way, has gone through the same thing. He's whip smart too. He has really repositioned himself very cleverly in the last 6 months.
I would quibble with that to a point.
Quibble, please. I like quibbles.
I don't totally disagree. I find Mamdani a very interesting figure here to analyze, because he clearly is aware that the progress of the socialist movement, the democratic socialist movement, rests a lot on how well he performs as mayor. He has the most executive power of any democratic socialist in America.
True. Yeah.
And there's a reason why he kept the pro-Israel police commissioner in her job. He recognized that if crime stats went the wrong way, that could sink the whole enterprise. And so when AOC says woke one was crazy, there's a bit of a fuzziness what is meant by that. And she didn't quite articulate what she meant by that, because you can in theory apply it to lots of different things. But we have seen in general, there's nobody that repeats the phrase defund the police anymore. Even people that still want to abolish prisons still have danced around that phrase and talked about things in more obliquely what they want to do with funding.
They're being more circumspect, but to be clear, that is still what is in the platform.
It's in the platform, but you get other people like Mamdani, you literally aren't doing that.
But aren't exactly. That's my point about Mamdani. And look, this is a good place to bring in. We have a comment here, and I welcome dissenting comments. I do. So Jerry CP2UJ, I feel like that's something like that should stand for something, but I can't figure out what it is. Says, I'm completely wrong about the DSA, possibly. DSA is the future, maybe. Do your homework and see what they actually stand for. It's way better than anything else. You know who did his homework on this? Bill did, and I'm going to paste his article about this. And look, if you want to do your homework, look at the embedded link in this article on Washington Monthly. Just pull it up and look at what Megan Romer actually says.
Yeah, but there's a question. What is the future of the DSA? Is it the platform, or is it Mayor Mamdani's record or something else? Yeah. Mayor Mamdani is not governing like the DSA platform. It's doing different things. So there are certain respects where I see very steely-eyed pragmatism on the part of Mamdani. I think police is one of them. He clearly understands that when you're a mayor, like, you have to balance your budget. It's not a non-negotiable. I worry that some of his budgetary choices might cause him problems down the road. It's not a super tight balanced budget, but he definitely has made decisions. He didn't just give away to everybody who knocked on his door and asked for money. He has pointed out that I can't do the housing vouchers at the level that some of the progressives want me to do housing vouchers for. He sent a directive to all his agencies, find a way to cut your budgets by 2.5% across the board. He's doing things like that. Now, here's why I think he's less pragmatic. And this gets to some of what we're talking about with these primaries. If you were a mayor anywhere in the country and you were told, hey, you're going to be mayor of a city, and somebody in your city is going to be on the House Appropriations Committee who can help steer money to you, and the people in line to become Speaker of the House and Senate Majority Leader are also from your city, you would think, I hit the freaking jackpot. Oh my God. I am so lucky that people are going to be in a position to give me money. And I know Mamdani cares about getting money from the feds, because here's an example of pragmatism. He went to the Trump White House with a made-up news headline designed to flatter Trump about how great it would be if Trump gave him $21 billion for a major affordable housing project. And to circle back what we were talking about before, all these people mad at the Democratic establishment because they don't fight Trump hard enough did not say a thing negative about Mamdani going to the Trump Oval Office hand in hand begging for money and they shouldn't have, because it was a smart thing for Mamdani to do.
Right. Look, that's a great bridge to something that we put in the parking lot. I'm mixing transportation metaphors, but let's go there anyway. And I'll just say, by the way, along the course of it, I did write about Mamdani's repositioning. I think his pragmatism on worth knowing. So I'll put that link in the chat right now as well. But I don't want to talk about my writing for a second. I want to talk about your writing. You wrote an article about this issue of the establishment. And what I've discussed earlier, as I think that there has been this sleight of hand maneuver to equate being more progressive with being more of a fighter. And I think that's bullshit. Now, look, I understand the frustration with Democrats. Look, I worked in Congress. I've managed congressional campaigns for Democrats. We have our challenges, okay? We have our challenges communicating clearly. We have our challenges getting ourselves and our ducks all in a row to really mount coordinated political efforts. That is true. At the same time, you do see this kind of, subtle conflation of the two things. Mara Gay in the New York Times wrote a couple of weeks ago, one of the most insipid op-ed pieces I've seen in the New York Times in a long time, in which she said, the uprising against the Democratic establishment is coming from the voters, cannot be contained. The Democratic establishment needs shaking up. It's weak. It's lost the confidence of its own voters. And that's why we're electing these fighters in the progressive movement. They're not the same thing. Being more progressive doesn't mean you're more of a fighter. It means, as you said, you're edgier. And what you wrote about this, now I'll just quote you back to you, is here. This is in your, shoot, I lost my own quote of yours. Damn it.
I can fill the void. Okay.
Oh, here it is. No, you do it. Well,
I'm not sure you're playing a quote, but I'll say this. Look, Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries give Trump what for every day. You can't go on any cable, you can't watch any Democrat on any cable TV news program and not see the Democrat bring a 2x4 to Donald Trump. They rhetorically fight Trump all the time. Mamdani doesn't. Mamdani is really careful not to attack Trump by name. He did in the campaign. He's not doing it as mayor because he's still trying to get that $21 billion. He doesn't have it yet. He's asked. Some people thought he had that one meeting, always got Trump wrapped around his finger. No, not quite. Trump's not giving him the money that he wants, but he's still working it, and he's being careful not to get on his bad side while he's still asking for it. And again, I'm not criticizing Mamdani for that. I think that is totally rational, but it's not fair to apply different standards about who's a fighter and who's not when you're not, and only progressives fight and establishment people don't. Here's an example that the opposite is true. And I'm not saying you should be mad about that. You should just respect that people have different rationales and different strategies to try to get what they want. And so I think all that is sensible on the part of Mamdani. What I think is less sensible is recruiting a primary challenger to the New York City member on the House Appropriations Committee and taking him out. That to me doesn't, it's not, I'm talking about Espillat. Espillat's someone who endorsed Cuomo in the primary, then got on board with Mamdani after the primary was over. And apparently there was a tacit agreement for Mamdani to endorse him afterwards that Mamdani didn't live up to. And so what is the advantage for his ability to get funds from the federal government if you take out a guy from your own party on the Appropriation Committee? I don't see the logic there. Now, some of that might be, again, and this is where essentially mayoral interest is colliding with movement interest. He has a movement interest to get as many DSA people in Congress as possible. But I would argue the highest interest for the DSA movement is for Mamdani to be a successul mayor.
Right, absolutely.
And this is no money for that. That's not going to help him.
Right. And this is where, again, I part of the reason I wanted you to go first is that I was having trouble deciding which of your quotes I liked better. And I'm just going to split the baby here and choose them both. One of the points you raise in this article is, on what basis and with what metrics can the Democratic Party writ large be found guilty of failing to fight hard enough? Democratic elected officials lambast Donald Trump daily on every available perch and platform. The legislative output for the current Congress is on track to be the meagerest, I love that word, in at least the last half century. Senate Democrats have flexed their filibuster power to suffocate most of the Republican Party's legislative agenda. The routine thrashing of Trump has contributed to his atrocious job approval ratings. But then you go on to point the following out, and this is what really sticks in my craw about it. Sahil Kapoor of NBC News observed on X, quote, Democratic elites want to run it back to 2018, which Haley Stevens embodies. Dem voters that year trusted the establishment and backed their favorite candidates. After 2024, that trust has eroded and they're looking elsewhere. Yes. You know who has two thumbs and would like to run it back to 2018? This guy right here. Do you notice that we won 41 fucking seats in 2018? We had a historic blue wave and we absolutely crushed the Trump agenda in 2018. It was the most successful election in living memory. And I was there working in Congress when we had the historic previous winner, the 2006 election. You write, why should Democrats forget 2018 and everything that followed? Not only did 2018 give us that legislative majority and bring Nancy Pelosi back to the speakership, it's also what led directly to Joe Biden defeating Donald Trump in 2020. And lest we forget, before his hubris got away from him and he decided to hang on, which was a huge self-own, a huge unforced error, Joe Biden had the most productive legislative session in at least 50 years, if not 80, of any president, and got the kind of legislation that you alluded to before passed through Congress. We got a lot out of 2018. And I don't think it's because the Democratic elites at the time were doing something stupendously wrong. Anyway, that is me using you to rant.
What's so bizarre about this narrative is, so you go back to 2018, and not only did Democrats win the House that year, they did it with mainly moderate candidates, or at least sort of or more mainstream progressives, not the more edgy candidates. And there were some high-profile failures. In particular, Randy Bryce, Iron Stash, was a big viral video sensation in the primary. He was going to succeed Paul Ryan, and he did not have. He lost, and it wasn't close in the general election. Andrew Gillum, who ran for governor against Ron DeSantis.
We don't like to think about that one quite as much. That
was a close race. But there was a debate where it seemed like Gillum really brought the heat to DeSantis, and everyone on social media loved it. That he was bringing all this fire, and it didn't work on election day. And people like Haley Stevens, who are a lot more boring. I think that was the same year. If sometimes I'm saying my dates wrong, I remember everyone got really excited about Beto O'Rourke that year, because he got close to Ted Cruz. And I made the point, Kyrsten Sinema did just as well as Beto O'Rourke in terms of improving upon what Hillary did in their respective states. She just did it in a far more boring way, but she actually won her state, and O'Rourke didn't. And of course, Sinema's now gone sideways at a whole lot of levels. But in terms of what works to win an election, there were a lot of lessons to draw from that. And 2020, what was sort of weird to me was all these presidential candidates that didn't learn those lessons and were chasing Bernie to try to win the hearts of the hardest core folks on the left. And they left the whole moderate lane to Joe Biden all to himself. And Biden takes it, not the strongest candidate on the stump that year, but pulls it off and wins the White House, brings the Senate along with him, and not only has a successful presidency, legislatively speaking, so much so that the people who were in his corner till the very bitter end were Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They're the ones saying in mid-July 2024, don't drop out. Don't let the wealthy interests force you out. This guy has delivered. Stick with your guy. And because it's not in anyone's interest to own that now, Biden hanging on too long is now an indictment of the establishment writ large. And the progressives can wash their hands of it and say, don't put that on us. We're the true fighters here. So the whole narrative, and again, I don't think Bernie and AOC were bad people for defending a guy who did deliver and believing he could go the distance. I was a Biden guy. up until that debate, and I got off. But so I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. But today is different. Today's 2026, and it doesn't automatically mean that the political wins in 2018 carry over to today. But election day will be an acid test. We're going to have different candidates with different theories of the case running at the Senate level and at the House level. The most high profile one is Abdul El-Sayed in Michigan. Again, so I'm not going to tell you today, oh, he's a goner and Tallarico's going to win, and then we'll see where things go from there. But it's a possibility just based on current polling. And as I've written a lot this year, I'm not going to cling to polling as if it's gospel, because it's been wildly wrong for a lot of reasons.
I do want to talk about that. I do want to talk about your writing about polling. I'll just put a bow on this conversation. Look, the last thing I'll say, because I know I've ranted a little bit here, and it's because I feel strongly on this, and I feel strongly about it for the odd reason of everything you wrote in your article today. It's because I actually don't think that progressives and more moderate Democrats are really all that far apart. And sure, I think there are truly crazy people like Megan Romer who would be happy to go off in a wildly strange direction that Vladimir Putin would applaud. But I think for the most part, the argument has been deployed cynically in a way that you point out. Diana DeGette lost her race after 15 terms on the charge that she had failed to get Medicare for all done. You know who'd been in Congress even longer and had failed to get Medicare for all done? It rhymes with Lerny Banders. And so I think that we're all still fundamentally on the same team. And if we can shed ourselves of kind of the needling from the super ultra communist crazy like slice, this tiny sliver that aren't really fully with us anyway, I actually think we 90% agree on most stuff. And I wish we would stop this fiction that, oh, moderate equals establishment equals weak and bad. There are plenty of indictments of the Democratic Party. And believe me, I have my quibbles with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and other longstanding Democratic leaders. It's probably time for a refresh of Democratic leadership. But don't mistake more progressivism for somehow being a better and more effective fighter against Trump. Let's talk about polling for a second. Once again, we have a media cycle that's great for content for people like you and me that seems to be suggesting polling is over. We cannot trust polls. Pollsters should be deported. You've written several articles about this. What is your verdict? Is polling over?
I'll tell you, I've never been like a poll hater. I've written about polls almost my whole professional political career. I have often defended polling from assumptions that they're always inaccurate. Even today, I might argue they're still more accurate than not. I'm not saying you got to throw every number out the window, but I did notice over the course of the Maine primary that a lot of the polls were coming from non-objective sources.
Yeah.
The Platner internals, PACs aligned with Platner. There's one from the Maine People's Resource Center that was pretty critical, and that organization is a 501c3 nonprofit, but has a 501c4 partner organization that ended up endorsing Platner, and that wasn't known at the time the poll came out. And these polls were coming out at a very sensitive time in that campaign. So Platner announces in August of 2025. He's barely known at that point, but gets a fantastic rollout, gets that Bernie Sanders endorsement soon after. And again, there's clearly an appetite for new leadership, younger voters, non-establishment, anti-gerontocracy, all that kind of thing. So when Janet Mills comes in October, and part of this narrative that subverts me is an assumption that she was unpopular at the point of entry, and that is not true. Her polls were solid at the point of entry. They went down after that point, arguably because there were people that really got into Graham Platner and were mad at her that she was stepping on what they thought was a good thing. And then soon after she comes in, there's the initial oppo dump of his Reddit posts, and then the tattoo. This is all October. And so then everyone's on the edge of their seat. What are the polls going to look like now? And there were a couple that came out. They were a little mixed at first. And then you had, if I remember correctly, November, December, a few that came out that were great for Platner, not just versus Mills, but also versus Susan Collins. And now people are really clung on to those. You see, people don't care about this stuff. He is sharper. He's got a better theory of the case. He's a better presence on the stump. This guy can save us. Once you get to that savior level in people's minds, it's hard for them to walk that back, even when new information comes over the transom. And that poll data, I think, was really critical for him solidifying a sense that you needed this guy to beat Susan Collins. And a lot of it just simply wasn't from independent sources. And there wasn't that much, period. So you're still dealing with kind of wisps of data. And it has real impact on the race. It definitely had an impact on Janet Mills being able to raise money and seem like a viable candidate. And so she does an negative ad buy in March for $500,000. Polls come after that, doesn't move the needle. I'm telling folks, the Republicans have reserved $100 million in ad buy time. $500,000 is not indicative of what this guy might face. But no one wanted to hear that. And so Mills says, forget it. I can't do this. So the polling narrative has a direct impact on a candidate's ability to compete. And so once Platner was forced out, when the rape allegations came, I went back over this whole chronology and then flagged, now let's look at Michigan here, because we had polling in April and May that showed a very mixed picture. And then you got a bunch of polls from El Said sources showing double-digit leads. And you have some from independent sources too that are mostly backing it up, not all of them, but mostly, but not necessarily from the most credible pollsters, but it's something. And now all of a sudden in the media, El Said's the front runner. And McMorrow gets squeezed out. She feels she can't compete anymore. She pulls the plug on her campaign. And then when it's down to two people, you got a couple polls that show more competitive race. I think one, Weidman Stevens was ahead. And then at the very end, you had this flood of El Said polling, double digits. And I was like, oh, this is over. This is just over. And that's not what he won, but not by 10 to 15 points, by a single point. And it raised the question, did the heavy flow of internal polling, did it influence McMorrow leaving the race and therefore changing the outcome? Did it influence other pollsters? This is a concept called herding, where you're afraid to be an outlier. And no one ever cops to herding, of course. And I don't know if it's like straight up, let's just turn the dial and make it look the same, or is it just they're assuming this demographic mix in the turnout, maybe I should do the same thing with my mix of turnout so I don't look like I'm off the rails here. And then you end up having similar looking polling. Or there's also relatedly what many people think has happened is there was non-response bias, that the people willing to take the poll, accept the poll, were more likely to be in El Said's camp. And we might be seeing this more because you go back 20 years, people would say, oh, you can't trust these polls. They're using landlines, not getting the young people on their cell phones. And now you see more polls using text to web. They get a text message on your phone and you click a link and go to a web page. That's going to miss the older people. And that seemed to be what happened in Michigan and perhaps in Wisconsin too. So I think we have to be, and layering all over this is just that the mainstream media organizations are not doing as much polling because it's gotten so expensive. It's expensive to do the calls. Yeah. Fewer people pick up the phone. It's easier to screen. So it costs more to get a big enough sample. And a lot of big players say, forget it. I'm just not going to spend the money on it. And you might say, great, who needs a stupid polling anyway? They were making these horse race elections and not talking about the issues. What we've seen happen is the campaigns themselves flood the zone. And that can work with perspective too.
That's what I found really most interesting. There was a lot that was interesting in your article and in what you just said. And so I want to weed through it. And then I really want to put a spotlight on that last piece, that flooding the zone piece. One thing that several commentators have pointed to is, look, primary polling is super hard. Yeah, it's even harder than general election polling. And there are fewer outlets doing it. It's expensive. It's hard to get right. There's an average, according to Elliot Morris, it's like a 13-point, confidence interval around primary polling. So they're off by about that margin a lot of the time. It's not that shocking what you saw in Wisconsin, for example, with Crowley versus Hung. So it is hard. And there is such a thing as differential non-response bias. It's something I've written about. And it's basically, if you're super encouraged, you're a lot more likely to want to talk about the candidate that you're behind if you're super discouraged. So there's this kind of feedback loop effect. Then you have kind of the technical, the herding thing, which is, oh, should I do, whenever I bring up technical stuff, I love to play the clip. Let's do some nerd talk for a second. Let's do the numbers.
Nerd alert!
It was my understanding that there would be no math.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
Herding is the effect where a pollster says, wait a second, these other gals, they're finding this. I'm not saying that. I'm going to look like a moron. And it turns out that's a real fear. You have people who are brave, like Ann Seltzer at the Des Moines Register, who put out an outlier of a poll showing Kamala Harris ahead, turned out to be wrong, and then Trump sued her. So
not just that, she quit the entire business.
She quit the business. Exactly.
And I'm not sure the Des Moines Register is doing any polling anymore.
They may be done without her.
We just had an Iowa Senate primary with the Josh Turk won against Zach Walz. Literally not a single independent poll from anybody in their race. The only poll data we had was the internals from the two campaigns, and they both said the exact opposite things.
Right.
They both showed 20-point wins for each of them, and only one of them turned out to be right. Now, here's a case where it was sort of two wrongs make a right, and no one was forced to. Actually, there was a third guy that did drop out, but Nathan Sage. But otherwise, going into election day, no one really knew what was going to happen, and so I think everything went as it would have otherwise gone. But you see in a case, we'll take Michigan again. I don't know exactly what happened there, but here's a possible scenario. Maybe the El Said being seemingly up by double digits made El Said voters say, I don't got to show up. He's got this in the bag. Right. And maybe the Stephen voters say, I better show up. I got to stand by my woman here. So who knows how it affects the outcome, perhaps against your own interest. And so it can be dangerous to get too caught up in your own hype.
There are two other things going on. I really do want to circle back to that really interesting one that you brought up there, that not a lot of people are talking about this. You're the first person who's really brought this up that I've read. I read a lot of stuff. So one other thing that you didn't mention is an effect that I actually wrote about for Washington Monthly, for which you were the editor,
Yes.
is the most underappreciated aspect of politics. It's the thing that even high information people, like the kinds of people who watch this show, really don't factor in quite enough to their thinking. It's how little attention most people are paying. It is shocking how little attention most people are paying. And people probably have, the majority of people who voted in Michigan probably had only the vaguest idea of who the candidates were, even the people who voted. Here's a pop quiz for you. Bill, you and I are separated physically by, 15 miles right now. We could have done this by shouting practically. Yes. So we're both in Massachusetts. Have you heard a thing? Have you seen a single ad for Markey versus Moulton, the Senate primary?
I have.
You have? What the hell, man? I'm a dedicated, but the point is, most Democrats, I would wager, in our neck of the woods, and we live in Wokistan, okay? We live in the greater outpost of North Democracia or whatever. I would bet most people have not gotten touched.
I don't think it's a lot. I don't watch a lot of TV anymore, but I have seen on YouTube, I've seen one version of an ad from each campaign, and they might be from a PAC or something. There's one there's a pro Moulton ad that I've seen a few times.
Okay.
From a guy who used to be with Markey, as an old Massachusetts guy who's like, I was with Markey in 1972, but it's time to pass the torch. And there's one that's an anti-Moulton that talks about him being too conservative on certain things. I saw it one time. So I'm not saturated.
It's incredible. With these primary polls, there is a certain amount. Like my wife literally asked me last week as she's filling out her ballot, have you thought about this Markey versus Moulton thing? I ran a campaign briefly against Moulton, so I like the guy. But this is the level that most primary voters are at. But let's talk about the one you brought up. So in that campaign, Moulton actually dropped out of that campaign. So I'm running a congressional campaign for an incumbent Democratic member of Congress in Massachusetts. And I get a call from a reporter I think it was The Hill, asking me about a new poll that our opponent just released. And I knew immediately what had happened. This is the type of poll that campaigns try to release, and they do it almost entirely for fundraising purposes. A little bit of it is to try to shape the media narrative of what's going on. But nowadays, what campaigns care most about, showing the poll to their donors, showing that it's close, but they've got a great shot or are ahead. So there's a reason to give money, and they're going to fundraise off that till kingdom come. Now, this particular poll happened to be so badly skewed, like the math of it was so insane that would have required every single Republican primary voter in the district to show up and vote twice. So sometimes you can tell that these things are badly biased. But the point is, what you're pointing to is not only has this practice continued, so more of these polls coming from campaigns are out there and they're what the media has to go on. But also there's a flood the zone effect going on that you're pointing to. And this is something that I haven't seen elsewhere, where it sounds like campaigns are strategically releasing a bunch of these, or allies are strategically announcing a bunch of these clustered together, which can not only drive the media narrative, but also create an overwhelming sense from anyone paying attention that this thing is cooked and over. And it can also affect whatever polling averages exist out there because it's all clustered together. And that's something that's brand new, cynical, and degrades the value of primary polling.
I definitely saw that happen in Maine and Michigan. And that's and we have also a case in Hawaii, the Hawaii First District, where the progressive challenger put out an internal poll like 2 days before the final primary. So it's not really for fundraising. I don't know why they did it, quite frankly. I don't know what the logic was. All it did was goose the Kalshi odds. It made it seem like the challenger was going to win. It's against the incumbent Ed Case. So the Kalshi odds said the challenger's got a 70% chance of winning now. And then Case wins by 21 points 2 days later. Now we have an example. We've two interesting internal polls came out recently. One is in the Kansas Senate race, where Adam Hamilton, who's a Methodist pastor, big church, won the Democratic nomination. Some people really think Kansas has had a Democratic governor for 2 terms. Right. Everyone forgets this. There's a whole book called "What's the Matter with Kansas?" The Democrats couldn't win Kansas. We actually won Kansas 2 times in a row, and no one seems to even know that it happened. So some people think that this guy Hamilton's got a real shot here. He's not a cookie cutter candidate, pastor, not part of the establishment, but moderate. And so in his internal pollsters, public policy polling, which I also wrote, has had a really good track record. This is probably the best track record of any pollster all season, is public policy polling, internal polling. Now, not perfect. They were oversold on their guy, Tom Steyer in California, but and a bunch of other races, pretty darn close to the mark, and sometimes even lowballing their client. So I'm not saying this means that, and they had Hamilton down by 1 point against the incumbent Roger Marshall. Now, maybe that's inflated. I wouldn't necessarily throw all the money into Kansas based on this one poll number alone, but I'm going to take a closer look at it. I'm going to maybe send my guys down there. I might do some focus grouping, see if this is for real. So I get why that poll was released. Now we have several independent polls in Michigan showing El Said behind Republican Mike Rogers, which really should raise a lot of red flags. The most recent was the Fox News poll. Yeah. I know it's Fox, but Fox actually has a pretty good
Now their polling outfit is legit.
And every other Senate race that they've polled has Democrats ahead. So it's not like they're not
including Texas.
Yes. Right, exactly. So they're not stacking the deck against Democrats. This is the one race where they have the Democrat behind. But it's not impossibly behind. You could still win. It's within margin of error. But if you took those numbers at face value, you would, if you were in the El Said campaign, say, okay, we got some work to do, guys. We had a really bruising primary. We got some weak spots into the Democrat coalition. We're not sold with the middle yet. We can't just do same old to win this race. We got to make some adjustments going into the general election. Then you have an internal poll. It comes up from the Senate Majority PAC saying that El Said's actually up by 6 points. I can't tell you who's right and who's wrong here.
Yeah.
But if I'm in the El Said campaign and I just don't really want to make those adjustments, and like El Said strict as a kind of guy that doesn't really like to do those kind of adjustments, he wants to do things his way, you could tell yourself, this is the correct poll. Let's glom onto this one and just keep plowing what we've been plowing. And that could begin. I don't know what the truth is. I can't tell you how this is going to turn out. If I was in the inner circle, I would be far more cautious and run a little more scared and say, here's where at least I have some evidence of weaknesses. Let's think about how we can address those, because what we've done so far hasn't solved that problem. And so we'll see. I feel like what I've seen so far from the LC campaign, very minor adjustments, not barely adjustments. I think they want to keep doing what they've been doing. And it's just, like, you want good data to tell you where you stand,
Right.
to know you need to make those adjustments or not. And are they getting that good data from their internal pollsters? That I don't know.
The final thing I'll say on this, and I'm realizing that even though we started a couple minutes late, I am keeping you a little late as well. So
That's
we
fine.
should probably curtail this pretty soon. But I will say that, look, there's a distinction to be made here. Okay. There is a value to polling. People who just blithely dismiss polls or say the polls don't matter, I don't think they quite have it right. And people who say the polls don't matter, it's like they do. You just have to know kind of what they're being used for. Campaigns that do internal polls, you'll do a benchmark poll first thing in your campaign to set course and understand what your vote goals are and what your plan of attack is. And then you'll do polls along the way to adjust course. Those kinds of polls, I guarantee you pollsters are trying to get right. There's no juking going on there, and they are valuable. There's probably a reason that Mary Peltola fired her campaign staff this week. We don't know exactly what it is, but I would bet you that there's something ineffective going on, and they're concerned about it. They're nipping it in the bud. Then there are the kinds of polls that you see that are public opinion research, Gallup, Pew. Those are incredibly valuable. That's valuable social science. There's a lot you can get out of that. They're prone to tons of mistakes and foibles and issues, but there's value there. And then there's horse race polling from public outlets. Problems, but valuable. I use a lot of that in my weekly midterm HQ write-up on Substack, where I track what's going on in the midterms. And then finally, you get this category of polls that are coming from campaigns. And I think what you're pointing out is they're becoming a bigger part of the media narrative because of the vacuum that's been created by public pollsters. And they're becoming part of the fundraising narrative. That's what's driving them out there. They're a poor source of information, and they're a very poor source of strategic decisions. All right.
I was going to say one thing there.
Please.
If you asked me a year ago, I would have said everything that you just said. And one thing that unsettles me is learning that in the Joe Biden campaign, in the most inside of the inner circle, they were not giving the candidate accurate poll. They were telling the candidate what he wanted to hear. It is shocking that, again, you would think professionals would not do something like that. And it really is malpractice. That's what has been reported is going on, that Pelosi literally said to them, like, you're polling, you're not getting told the real numbers here. And I worry that something like that might be going on in the El Said campaign, that there's just, and that not that people are being deliberately dishonest, but that there's just a human nature tendency just to want to believe what you want to believe and gravitating toward the data that it feels more comfortable. That you would think that pros wouldn't do that, but I think sometimes human nature can override what you would think would be the clinical thing to do.
We talk about this on Political Rehab all the time. I have a Republican you also do a show that's a bipartisan show. I do a weekly politics show with a Republican co-host. We talk about this. He was criticizing Republican ad making as being like straight down the line adoration of Trump. And he's, what the hell are we doing here? No one wants to hear this unless you're like some diehard MAGA dead ender. And the point is that political operatives are subject to the same foibles as other humans, and probably more so. They make even more mistakes than your average bear, and this is clearly one of them. All right, Bill, this has been long overdue. We really should have done this more recently than this. I think we're not going to have this long a gap before I have you back again next time. So thank you very much. And to everyone out there, sorry for the disruption over the last couple of weeks. Like I said, we've been juggling. We've had summer schedules. Cliff's been taking some slots. We're trying to get back to normalcy, people, back to normalcy. And speaking of which, 77 days. We're only 77 days away from the midterm as of today. So keep the faith. We are on the right track. Okay, we are on the right track. Progressives, moderates, we all love each other. Okay, we're all on the same team. We're going to band together. We're going to do this. So until next week, when I see you again, stay safe, be well, be good to each other. I'll see you soon.